Gary Player was one of the toughest. Gary would sit there and he'd stand up there just like old times, and I mean that putt's that long. I said, "What the hell are you doing?" Gary, when you got with Gary coming down, Raymond Floyd was tough.
He was crazy. That is what the legends whispered when Lee Trevino walked onto the course. Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear himself, felt rattled every time they paired together. Arnold Palmer watched his army desert him. Raymond Floyd, the ultimate hustler, got hustled. But here's the question nobody asked. Why did the greatest players in golf history fear a guy who taught himself the game behind a caddy shack? The answer is not what you think. By the end of this story, you will understand why Trevino did not just beat the legends. He dismantled them. Lee Trevino was not supposed to be there. He was raised in a dirt floor shack with no electricity or running water in Garland, Texas. His grandfather was a gravedigger. His mother worked herself to exhaustion. Trevino never knew his father. At 3 years old, he was picking cotton in the fields. While Nicklaus and Palmer were being groomed at country clubs, Trevino was caddying at the Dallas Athletic Club just to survive. He quit school in 8th grade to work full-time. He did not take lessons. He taught himself golf on a makeshift 3-hole course built in the dirt behind the caddy shack. At 17, he joined the Marine Corps and spent 4 years as a machine gunner. That experience gave him discipline. It also gave him something the country club kids could never understand: immunity to pressure. The old guard built their power on privilege and protocol. They expected silence at Augusta. They expected you to fear Cliff Roberts, the dictator in the clubhouse. They expected you to bow to the death stare of a competitor. But Trevino came from a world so far removed from theirs that none of it mattered. He was not trying to climb their social ladder. He was executing a hostile takeover. His famous line captures it perfectly. "I was not supposed to play the game." He said that over and over. And it was not humility, it was a weapon. He was saying that they needed the privilege, the lessons, the structure. He did not. That inverted the class dynamic entirely. Their privilege became a weakness. His poverty, his dig-it-out-of-the-dirt mentality, became the ultimate strength. Before you comment, hit that like button and tell me which golfer you think had the best mental game of all time. Drop your answer below. But Trevino did not just survive on grit. He earned what he called his graduate degree in golf on the Texas gambling circuit. This was not some weekend game with buddies. This was high-stakes pressure that made PGA tournaments look easy. His most famous quote about pressure says it all. "You do not know what pressure is until you have played for $5 a hole with only $2 in your pocket." That was his daily reality. He honed his game at Hardy's driving range, where he famously played with a Dr. Pepper bottle as a club. He hustled gamblers at Tennyson Park, a Dallas municipal course where sharks gathered like ants at a picnic. This world taught him how to measure another man in an instant. It taught him his killer instinct. The match with Raymond Floyd is the perfect story. Floyd was an established tour pro and a formidable hustler himself. He came to El Paso looking for a money game. Trevino was working as a bag boy and assistant pro. Floyd walked up and asked who he was playing against. Trevino said, "Well, that would be me, sir." Floyd could not believe it. "What? I am playing against a bag boy?" The match became a heavyweight title fight. The gallery was a bunch of pickup trucks bouncing down the fairway, full of guys drinking beer and watching. This was Trevino's element. He used his home course advantage to beat Floyd in the first 2 rounds. Floyd had to shoot lights out just to win on day 3. But the damage was done. Floyd represented the old guard. Wealthy, established, confident. Trevino exposed him. He proved that his hustler pressure was more potent than tour pressure. For Trevino, the pressure of a major championship was nothing compared to playing for $5 with $2 in his pocket. When he faced Nicklaus or Palmer later, he was less pressed than he was at Tennyson Park. That mental inversion gave him permanent psychological high ground. And then there was his swing. Before he could win with his mouth, he had to win with his clubs. His rivals did not just fear his background, they feared his relentless, amazingly consistent ball striking. The most unsettling part was where it came from. An unorthodox, self-taught swing that was not a flaw, but a genius system designed for perfect repeatability under pressure. Trevino taught himself to play. His swing was famously described as 5 wrongs that combined to make an immaculate right. It was flatter than most, born from playing on more dirt than grass. He aligned his body well left of his target, a push player setup, and faded the ball back to the pin. This was not an accident. It was a pressure-proof system. His key move was a pivot-driven swing that featured a grooved anti-left release. He held and maintained the levers of his wrists through impact. That prevented the club face from closing prematurely. It mechanically eliminated the dreaded hook, the big miss that destroys a player under pressure. Trevino's most famous quote about his game was deeply technical. "You can talk to a fade, but a hook will not listen." His rivals feared his swing because it was mathematically reliable. While they were fighting a two-way miss, a hook, or a slice, Trevino's anti-left release meant he was only playing a one-way curve. That is an enormous competitive advantage. The genius of his system was its versatility. To hit a draw, he did not change his reliable grooved swing. He simply aimed the club face less right at setup and made the exact same swing. He never had to worry about the ball hooking on him. His competitors were facing a man with an unbreakable, repeatable system that they, with their fundamentally sound swings, could not copy. The old guard could have dismissed his flat lunge as illegitimate, the product of a hustler, not a champion. But one anecdote silenced all technical criticism. Ben Hogan himself validated Trevino's genius. Trevino is considered one of the greatest ball strikers in history. Butch Harmon said Trevino had the best ball flight since Ben Hogan. David Ledbetter called him the best iron player he has ever seen, but the ultimate validation came from Hogan. When the tour came to town, Hogan would make a special effort to watch Trevino play. The crucial story comes from when Hogan was running his own club company. When Hogan was preparing to release a new line of prototype clubs, he would give his representatives a specific instruction. Take this set over to Dallas and let that little Mexican boy hit them. He will tell me if they are solid. This Hogan seal of approval is perhaps the single most important data point in understanding the fear Trevino inspired. The establishment could dismiss his behavior as coarse. They could dismiss his background as inappropriate, but they could not dismiss his swing if Ben Hogan personally endorsed it. Hogan did not care that Trevino was a little Mexican boy who learned in a caddy yard. He cared that Trevino possessed the rare, innate ability to know what a solid strike felt like. This anecdote proved that the hustler's feel was on par with the icon's science. It confirmed that the man they wanted to dismiss was, in fact, a technical virtuoso. With his game validated, Trevino deployed his other, more insidious weapon, his mouth. His rivalry with Jack Nicklaus, his chief rival, was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Nicklaus, the Golden Bear, was the game's dominant force. He built his success on a foundation of superhuman concentration. Trevino was the only man who figured out how to systemically dismantle that foundation. Nicklaus himself later admitted, "Of all my contemporaries, Trevino was the hardest to beat." The dynamic of their rivalry was established in their very first pairing. Nicklaus, aware of Trevino's reputation for non-stop wise-cracking chatter, approached him before the round. He informed Trevino that he preferred not to talk much while playing. Trevino's legendary reply was not a joke. It was a declaration of psychological warfare. "That is okay, you do not have to talk, you just have to listen." With that single sentence, Trevino reversed the power dynamic. He instantly communicated that the match would not be played in Nicklaus's world, silence, but in Trevino's world, chatter. He drove him crazy. Nicklaus's greatest weapon was his fortress of solitude. Trevino, with his yapping, was the only man who refused to honor its walls. He invaded Nicklaus's mental fortress, forcing the Golden Bear to expend finite mental energy processing his endless stream of jokes and stories. He neutralized Nicklaus's greatest strength, forcing him to play the game on Trevino's terms. Trevino's instinct for psychological warfare was never more brilliant than at the 1971 U.S. Open at Marion Golf Club. After tying Nicklaus in the tournament proper, the two prepared for an 18-hole playoff. The tension was immense. Nicklaus, the deadly serious victory machine, was in his element. He sat under a tree, head down, cloaked in his intimidating aura of focus. Trevino, golf's most talented class clown, recognized he could not win in that environment. He had to change the environment. Remembering his daughter had left a toy snake in his golf bag, he pulled out the rubbery object and playfully tossed it at Nicklaus. The effect was instantaneous. The Golden Bear was seen scrambling like a frightened fifth grader. A nearby woman screamed. Then, crucially, Nicklaus laughed. Trevino, seizing the moment, shouted, "I need all the help I get." The rubber snake was a psychological grenade. It was an act of pure, calculated absurdity that shattered the sacred tension of the U.S. Open. It forced Nicklaus to react and, by laughing, to unwittingly drop his shield of concentration. The act reduced the golf legend to a fifth grader, leveling their status. Trevino, who thrived in the chaos of a parking lot, had successfully dragged the U.S. Open playoff into his comfort zone. Now loosened up, Trevino shot a 68 to defeat Nicklaus by 3 strokes. Trevino's rivalry with Arnold Palmer was less head-to-head and more cultural. The fear Palmer felt was not of being beaten, but of being replaced. Palmer was the king, an icon whose brand was built on his connection to the common fan, famously known as Arnie's Army. Trevino's emergence as an authentic common man and working man was a direct existential threat to Palmer's brand. Trevino represented the guy who goes to the driving range, the municipal player, the truck driver, the union man, in a way the commercially polished Palmer no longer could. Trevino's galleries were dubbed Lee's Fleas. A 1971 Time magazine article captures the moment of cultural displacement at the Canadian Open. When Trevino was announced, several hundred spectators immediately deserted Arnie's Army to join the happy, noisy throng called Lee's Fleas. This was the old guard's commercial fear made manifest. Trevino did not just compete with Palmer for trophies. He competed for market share. His Mexican-American heritage and working-class authenticity made him a hero to the poor, the minorities in a way Palmer never could be. The moment Arnie's army began defecting to Lee's fleas was the moment Trevino proved he could wound Palmer in a way Nicklaus never could. He could steal his audience. Raymond Floyd felt the fear of exposure. Floyd, a shark, was outsharked. Trevino proved his bag boy gambling experience was more potent than Floyd's tour pro experience. The old guard hated Trevino's gambling past, his humor, his coarse personality. He broke their norms. He put golf in the parking lot instead of the boardroom. They feared his defiance and his power with the fans. Ultimately, the fear Trevino inspired in the old guard was not just about his score. It was about his very existence, his background, his humor, his ethnicity, and his nonconformist behavior were a profound act of defiance. A 1971 Sports Illustrated analysis put it best. Trevino was the common man with an uncommon touch who has bewitched, bothered, and bewildered the custodians of the game's mores. What Lee Trevino has done is take the game out of the country club boardroom and put it in the parking lot where everybody, not just doctors and lawyers, but Indian chiefs too, can get at it. He was dubbed the Country Club Cantinflas, a reference to the famous Mexican comedian. This appeal was a direct threat. The old guard viewed his working-class background, gambling history, and nonconformist behavior as inappropriate. A veteran pro sniffed, "Sometimes Lee can be so coarse." The old guard feared demystification. The power of golf's establishment was built on mystique. The hallowed grounds, the unspoken rules, the starched formality. Trevino, the Merry Mex, treated it all as a joke. He was yapping where silence was demanded. By putting the game in the parking lot, he was not just inviting the masses. He was proving that the boardroom was irrelevant. Trevino's most direct act of defiance was his personal war with the Masters and its autocratic co-founder, Cliff Roberts. He skipped the Masters 3 times during his prime in 1970, 1971, and 1974. He made it clear his problem was not with the course, but with Cliff Roberts. His public assessment was blistering. Cliff Roberts was a dictator. His core complaint was against the club's suffocating elitist atmosphere. He played by his rules, and you had to walk on eggshells at Augusta when you were there, Trevino said. "I am not an eggshell walking guy. Never have been." In 1972, he stored his shoes in the trunk of his car rather than use the clubhouse locker room. He famously joked that if he were not a qualified player, the club would not have let him onto the grounds except through the kitchen. This defiance was linked to the club's specter of racism. Trevino bristled against the establishment that had rules blocking his friend Charlie Sifford, the game's finest African-American player, from competing. Trevino's boycott was the ultimate fearless act. The old guard's ultimate weapon was prestige, the green jacket. By refusing to play, Trevino neutered that weapon. He was the only superstar with the stature and the guts to tell the dictator that his power was an illusion. While other players were gutless and walked on eggshells, Trevino proved his freedom by walking away. This was the most profound threat of all. A man who simply did not want what they had to offer if it meant compromising who he was. The fear Lee Trevino inspired was total. It was technical, psychological, cultural, and moral. He was a composite weapon who attacked the game's establishment on every front. His rivals feared his game, a genius pressure-proof system validated by Ben Hogan that eliminated the hook plaguing them under pressure. They feared his mind, a hustler's killer instinct that redefined pressure, and a non-stop chatter that invaded the sacred concentration of Jack Nicklaus. He could dismantle an opponent with a rubber snake as easily as a 1-iron. They feared his brand, an authentic common man who stole the hearts of the working man and caused Arnie's army to defect to Lee's fleas. And the old guard feared his spirit, an inappropriate, nonconformist defiance that saw him call a dictator and boycott the Masters on principle. Jack Nicklaus provided the definitive summary. Of all my contemporaries, Trevino was the hardest to beat. But this was not just because of his 6 major titles or his 29 PGA Tour wins. It was because Lee Trevino was a living, yapping mirror. To Raymond Floyd, he reflected the artifice of tour pressure versus real pressure. To Jack Nicklaus, he reflected the vulnerability of a mind that required silence. To Arnold Palmer, he reflected the gap between a manufactured king and the actual working man. And to Cliff Roberts, he reflected the moral bankruptcy of an elitist system. His rival's fear was a reaction to a man who was so completely, unapologetically himself. The hustler, the marine, the cantinflas of the country clubs, the genius ball striker. He forced them to confront their own insecurities. He was the inappropriate man who was not supposed to play, yet he proved that they were the ones who did not belong on his stage. Today, at 85 years old, Lee Trevino is loved by the game. The legends who once feared him now admit the truth. They feared him because he was better under pressure, smarter psychologically, and tougher than anyone they had ever faced. His legacy is not just the trophies, it is fearless authenticity in a world that demanded conformity. So tell me in the comments, who do you think was the most intimidating golfer of all time? Was it Trevino, or does someone else deserve that title? Drop your answer below and let me know what you think.